Welcome to Shoot Like a Girl, a podcast featuring interviews with extraordinary military women from around the world who push their limits on and off duty. I'm your host, Kate Stewart, and this is episode number 6. Today's guest is Captain Leigh Pinard. Leigh joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 2004, and she has had a very fascinating career. She has been a member of the Ceremonial Guard, deployed to Afghanistan, performed with the Skyhawks Parachute Team, and raced triathlon internationally, representing Canada as a member of the CISM Triathlon Team. She is currently the National Patient Safety Officer for Canadian Forces Health Services and was recognized by Esprit de Corps magazine in 2020 as one of the top women in defense.
Steady, steady, nice and steady. Light, hill, cover. I'm a steamroller, baby.
I'm a steamroller, baby.
Just a rolling down the line.
Just a rolling down the line.
I'm a steamroller, baby.
I'm a steamroller, baby.
Just a rolling down the line.
Just a rolling down the line.
So you better get out of my way now.
So you better get out of my way now.
Or I roll all over you.
Before I roll all over you.
Okay, and we are recording. Welcome, Leigh. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Kate. Thanks so much for having me.
So I guess we'll just jump right in and talk about where you grew up and what made you want to join the Canadian Forces.
Yeah, for sure. It's actually kind of a funny story. And most people that know me well, since I joined the military, when I tell them the story of how I ended up joining, this light bulb goes off and they're like, it all makes so much sense. So I am from Ottawa, born and raised. And my background was actually, I was supposed to be a ballerina when I grew up.
Okay.
So when I was 12, I moved away from home to go to the National Ballet School in Toronto. And I came back home to Ottawa for high school, and I went to Canterbury High School, which is an arts high school. So a little bit like the movie Fame with a lot less drama. And I was there for dance, and I also took drama while I was there. And I sort of throughout that discovered gymnastics. And so I started competing as well in trampoline when I was in high school. And during that time, though, growing up in Ottawa, we lived sort of near Carleton University, and there's a reserve Navy unit there, and they have a big anchor out front. So when I was a kid, we would always go for a walk around there, and I always thought it would be neat to join the Naval Reserve. But strangely enough, at the time, I had said, oh, well, maybe I could be a medic. And for the Navy, I mean, I was 14, 15, 16 and didn't really know. And then when I was old enough that I could join the reserves, I sort of went and talked to a recruiter. I think I must have been 16 or 17. And they were telling me about basic training and that I would have to be away for the summer for that. And it was at a point in my gymnastics that I didn't want to take a whole summer off of training. So I decided not to at that time and sort of had forgotten about it, honestly. And then when I was in first year university at the University of Ottawa, I was standing in line at Tim Hortons, and I saw they had a career fair job fair downstairs in the university center, and on the sign of people who were there were tree planters. And at that point, I'd been lifeguarding in my summers, and I thought, oh, tree planting sounds really fun and just be outside all summer. And so I went down to talk to the tree planters with my Tim Hortons coffee. And also at the career fair were some infantry soldiers from the Reserve Infantry Unit in Ottawa. And they were recruiting to do the changing of the guard on Parliament Hill, so Ceremonial Guard. So I kind of just went over to talk to the guys in uniform because that looked like fun. And I asked if they let girls do that because it was 2000, this would have been 2003, 2004, early 2004, I'd say. And the guys were like, yeah, we need more girls. So I said, well, that sounds fun. Sure, sign me up. And so they wrote out a recruiting form, handed it to me, told me to bring it to the recruiting office. And it was everything, I have to say, was really fast tracked at that point, because I think that would have been in late January, early February of 2004. I did all my recruitment stuff during reading week the following week, and then I was sworn in as a reserve infantry soldier with GGFG on the 30th of April, and then I was off to basic training the very next day. So it was sort of fast and furious with not a lot of time to think about it. But and that was sort of, my just going to be my summer job. So when I had talked to them, I thought, well, that sounds like a great summer job. And here I am over 16 years later. It's been the longest summer of my life. But,
And to think that you could have been out tree planting instead. It's quite a contrast. I totally understand that, because when I did BMQ, so I did join the Navy Reserves, and I did the BMQ in the summer, which was in Borden, and it was 10 weeks. And there were a lot of really younger kids, like high school kids, first year university. To me, that hadn't really been an option, or I guess I just didn't really pay attention if there were any military people at job fairs. But that was the big thing for them, like get university paid for. It's a great summer job compared to a lot of other summer job options for high school kids. So it was really neat.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So you joined as the Ceremonial Guard, and then how did you end up becoming a medic?
So when I was on my basic training, sort of quickly realized that I had joined the infantry, and as fun as it was, wasn't really what I wanted to be when I grew up. So on my basic training, the medic, who is sort of on our BMQ, is actually, she's still a very good friend of mine. She's now Chief Warrant Officer Lefebvre. She's the RSM at 28 Field Ambulance. I went up to her after her first aid lecture one day, and I said, I wanted to be a medic. When I was at the training office, they told me the medics were full. And so she was fantastic, and she got a bit of a chuckle out of that, I think, and said, no, we have room. But she said, get all your training done. She said, you won't regret doing the training. And then she said, here's my number, give me a call. And she said, we'd love to have you. So yeah, so I did that. So my, my big infantry career was only a little over a year with GGFG, which, to be honest, she was right. It was fantastic. I'm so glad that I got to spend that year there, and I learned just so many really good sort of soldiering skills, obviously with them, and then transferred or remustered to be a medic. So
Okay, so did you end up doing the ceremonies at Parliament Hill?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
So for the first it was very fast and furious. So we did our basic training was the month of May, and we did it at Connaught Ranges, and then the month of June essentially was intensive drill. So we were at Carleton University in the parking lot every day, just practicing drill until our feet hurt. And then I think our first parade would have been late June that year. And then all of July and August, basically, we were doing, when I did it, it was such a great go. We were sort of 4 days on, 4 days off. And it was shared. So the majority of the one group, our group was GGFG, which is Governor General Foot Guards soldiers. And then the other group was the Canadian Grenadier Guards from Montreal. So we sort of switched back and forth with them. And then in our 4-day rotation, we would do 3 days. We're at Parliament Hill doing the changing of the guard ceremony. And then our 4th day was working at the Governor General's house doing the sentry duty.
Okay, that's really interesting. And so you see the outfits that are the red tops and the big black hats. I'd imagine that would be so hot in the summertime. How long are you guys out there for?
On a normal shift, it was an hour. The funny thing is that you really have no clue how long you're standing out there. So the parade days were easier on the one hand because you were moving. It was marching from Cartier Drill Hall up to Parliament Hill, onto Parliament Hill. And especially if you were the new guard coming on, you were constantly doing drill. So the parade went actually quite quickly when you were on parade. But yeah, definitely at the Governor General's house, we were either standing at the front gate or back at right against the house. And the shift was an hour. So I remember standing, especially at the gates, because the blocks or the cement in front of the house is so white. It was quite blinding in the sun, but we'd always be people's watches, like the tourists coming by. We'd always be, if they come to take a picture next to us, we'd kind of be like squinting, trying to see what time it was. And now whenever I pass by on my bike or just going to visit, I always make sure to say what time it is, because I just remember sometimes standing there and wondering how much longer I had to stand there. And we had a lot of fun with it though. So we did shifts that we would call the Iron Guard, and we'd try, and so if you really felt like you needed to move, if you were feeling like you were faint or just, your feet were falling asleep, there's a junior and senior sentry. So either of you could call a beat, and you do that by tapping the butt of your rifle. And then your beat is basically you're just pacing back and forth. So you'll see them sometimes pacing back and forth, and you can keep walking as long as you want. And we sort of had a hand signal to let the other person know that, okay, that's enough walking now. And we'd go back into our little, standing right outside the little house. So some shifts though, you would say ahead of time, no, we're not going to call any beats. And so you'd truly be standing there without moving for an hour. And then other times it was really quiet, and you just sort of keep walking back and forth until something happened.
Yeah, I can imagine that would get pretty long. I'm sure the people, when you tell them the time, probably appreciate that quite a bit.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I know a big thing too is people were always trying to get us to laugh, which I have to say I was pretty good at, because when people came and they were trying to make you laugh, it was easy to be like, well, they're just trying to make me laugh. But I remember, I think it was the first time my mom came with my brother, and as soon as I saw them, I was like already almost giggling, and my mom could, spot that from really far away. And she told me, I remember her listening to her being like, no, Eric, turn around, like, we have to walk away for a minute. And just yeah, it was so funny. They weren't even doing anything funny, but that was the one time that I just remember being like, oh my goodness, don't laugh. So
yeah, you all see videos on YouTube of especially the ones at Buckingham Palace and in London, and everyone trying to do everything under the sun to make them laugh. So I'd imagine it would be really hard to keep a straight face at certain times.
Definitely. It was the summer of 2004 when I was doing it. I think security was a lot less then, and people could come right up next to us to take pictures and things like that. So we definitely had people standing very, very close to us, which, I mean, at the time I didn't really think anything of it, but yeah, they were always sort of looking. And I remember one guy who's so funny, he came back and he said this little girl was just staring so intently at him, and she was quite young. And so he made a funny face at her, and the little girl said, mommy, the soldier moved. And she was like, no, honey, they can't move. They're not allowed. And the mom looked away. He made another funny little face at her.
That's cute.
Yes.
So when I was reading your bio for the Esprit de Corps award, it said that you were deployed to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. So was this as a civilian, or was this in Canadian Forces capacity?
No, that was actually a Red Cross civilian deployment. That happened, Hurricane Katrina happened in August of, it would have been 2000.
August 2005, yeah.
So I was in my last year of university in September 2005, and Hurricane Katrina had just happened. And sort of before I joined the military, I had been doing some volunteer work with the Red Cross, mostly local, just doing first aid for events with them. And when Hurricane Katrina happened, they needed people who had a lot of Red Cross training, specifically family reunification and just sort of working in a shelter. And so the timing and the stars just kind of aligned for that when because it was fourth year, my undergrad was in health science and psychology. And by fourth year, I had just a lot of spares and a lot of other courses that I could sort of just be working like sort of independent studies. So when the Red Cross called and asked if I would be available, I sort of went and talked to all of my professors, and I said, I have this opportunity. I'd really like to go. Would you be willing to sort of work with me, and I can continue to work while I'm away and keep you posted? So, and all of them, it was incredible. Everybody at the university came together and said, yeah, go. And so at that point, I had just remustered to being a medic. So I was Class A reservist then. So I was sort of in school full time working at the reserve unit Tuesday nights and weekends, and they were unbelievably supportive as well. And everybody said, yes, go make us proud. So
right, yeah.
but it was a Red Cross deployment, but it definitely with the military background, I would say at that point, really prepared me well because we were sleeping in a shelter on cots and working very long days. But yeah, I know it was incredible experience, but I also think that was the experience that sort of opened my eyes up to the rest of the world. So growing up in Ottawa is definitely a bubble. And, I think that experience at that point, like I said, I was in fourth year university. I had all my ducks in a row to, graduate, get my dream job, get married. Like I sort of, everything was aligned how I always thought I wanted to sort of live the rest of my life. And that experience really sort of showed me what the rest of the world, like that there was just so much else. Sort of decided I wanted to do more traveling and more sort of the military. At that point, I think, is when it became more of a option for me to see the world and to do different things that I wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's interesting, you say that Ottawa was sort of a bubble, and, you always think of generally North America being this safe bubble that's doesn't really have that much going wrong. But I mean, from what I saw and from what I've heard of the pictures and videos of Hurricane Katrina, it's almost like that was then transformed into like this third world, just so far removed from what North America usually is. So it's like you're getting that experience, but it's a lot closer to home than you would think.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And how long did you end up being there for?
I was there just under a month. So it wasn't too long with me, long enough. So my main role, that it was funny, we all just kind of fell into these roles that made sense for us. And so when I got there, I was working in a shelter in Baker, which is sort of north of New Orleans. And it was basically all these families who'd been displaced, and there were so many children in the shelter, and they didn't have very much set up for them. So at that point, I mean, I'd been sort of lifeguarding and teaching swimming, and I loved working with kids. So I said, can I take this little corner of the shelter, and can I make it a kids corner? And I'll, we had like a little bit of a budget, and I said, can I pick up some arts and crafts and things like that? So that was sort of my first big undertaking there, was just setting up something for the kids. And they'd gotten them into schools, local schools. But they were having quite a hard time, a lot of them adjusting. And there was, actually it surprised me for something that had happened in the same state. They were calling the kids who'd come from the shelter, they were calling them just really awful things. And it was really heartbreaking to me. So that sort of quickly became my mission, was just like, how can I make this awful time in their lives just a little bit better? So that's where I ended up.
From there, then you went back to Ottawa and had a different view on what you might like to pursue in life. Is that the idea?
Yeah, definitely. So I had been, one of the other courses that I had in fourth year was a co-op, and I was working in the federal government, in the First Nation and Inuit Health Branch. And I sort of quickly realized, being deployed, that was more what I wanted to do. I wasn't ready to sit in an office. So I finished up the projects that I had started with the First Nation and Inuit Health Branch, just to sort of not leave them hanging, I guess. But then I sort of said, can I work this into my co-op placement? So I took sort of all my lessons learned from my experience with the children, and I wrote an annex to the Red Cross deployment binder that we had, to sort of say, like, these were the challenges that we were facing, and specifically the kids were facing, and this was what we did to overcome them, and just some example activities and things like that. So sort of my biggest project that I would say, or difference that I made. Everybody in the store had to wear these bracelets. And they were just, when you go down south and you're at a resort.
The resort bracelets, yeah.
But it was also this like yellow bracelet that was so identifying as, because my big thing was just, why are they having such a hard time at the schools? And anyway, so I went and I just bought GIMP and those big beads. And I asked the shelter manager, I said, can we remove those bracelets from the kids and we'll make them nice bracelets? And I said, we can make sure that they have like 3 yellow beads, or I can't remember what it was, but I said, I'll have a specific thing on them so that, like, but I mean, by that point we knew who belonged there and who didn't. And it was so funny. So that was our big after school activity one day. We were beating these bracelets, and then we went around to the parents and I said, we can cut their bracelets off. And the mom's cutting the bracelets and they were like, you're free, honey, and putting the bracelets on, the new ones that we'd made on them. And then later that evening, a bunch of the adults came over to the table and they were like, well, can we have our bracelets too for the kids? But yeah, no, it was neat. And then when I went to the back to the headquarters, like the Red Cross headquarters, they'd heard that story of these bracelets there. So it was kind of such a small project, but it sort of turned into a bit of a thing for the deployment. So it was neat.
Yeah, that's really fantastic, because it's such a simple idea, but it just takes that out of the box thinking. It's like, well, you've still got a bracelet. It's just a little different, and it's not as identifying and might not have as many negative consequences for the kids.
Yeah.
So how did you end up deploying to Afghanistan?
Yeah, so when I came home, I finished my degree, and it just worked perfectly that basically, I think it was in my last week of exams, I was able to find a Class B contract to work, so a full-time reserve contract to work as a medic at NDMC, which was our main clinic in Ottawa at the time. And so I was working in the specialist clinic. So we were doing sort of assisting all the specialist doctors. So we had our one who's our lumps, bumps, and vasectomy doc, and
Right.
dermatologist, and the general surgeons who were sort of doing consults. So again, it was just, I feel like so many things in my career, the stars just aligned at the right time. And I took that Class B. So I was working full time there, and just trying to think how the timeline would have been. I guess I was there about a year, and then the opportunity for deployment came up, and I sort of jumped on that one. And yeah, so I ended up deploying in October 2007. I think I left on Thanksgiving weekend, and then I was there until late April 2008. I was definitely very lucky. I think when I was deployed with a multinational Counter-IED team. So there was me and one other Canadian, but then the majority of our team was made up of Americans, some British, some Australians. There were some Germans, some French officers, and then there were 2 or 3 Irish soldiers who were so much fun to work with. They were definitely my favorite people on the team. So yeah, it was a big team, and sort of, I would say, one of your questions was, what did a typical day look like? And I feel like I didn't really have any 2 days that were the same, because we were sort of supporting so many different things, whether we were traveling, working with other nations, or back sort of closer to camp and doing more research, into the Counter-IED mission. So whether it was working on new ECN, so electronic countermeasures, or just sort of supporting other things around the camp. So yeah, and looking back, I definitely, was flipping through my journal from when I was there, and just looking back at all the places in Afghanistan that I got to travel. And it was definitely a really great experience, I think, for me, that I got to travel up to the more northern parts of Afghanistan, the more peaceful areas that Massoud's Northern Alliance had finished. So up in Mazar-e Sharif, and then spend a lot of time at the PRTs sort of all over the country, north, south, east, and west. Yeah, there were some parts that were just so incredibly beautiful. So there was one in particular in Poli Comrie. It was a PRT there, and Poli Comrie is in sort of a northeastern region, and there's actually a river that runs right through the village. So everything there is green, and it just was such a stark contrast from, especially Kandahar, where the sand was so fine, it was just like dust, So yeah, a lot of our work was when we were out, we were working with different region or different nationalities as well. And the one that sort of surprised me the most was working with the Norwegians. And, I'd heard prior that all Norwegians have obligatory service, and sort of my idea of what I thought a military with oblig service would be like was completely different to what they were. They were just the most switched on, happy soldiers that I worked with, I think, out of anybody. Everybody that I worked with, I would say, making a huge generalization, but they were just always smiling, always happy, always seemed upbeat, and just, really hard workers. And yeah, they were just incredible to work with. So that was definitely a highlight.
And so do you have any particularly memorable stories or experiences of being there?
So just a couple stories, things that sort of stuck out to me. So the first was definitely, when was one of my first convoys there, and we'd had to take a different route back than we'd sort of planned initially. And we ended up in an area that I don't think there was generally a very big military presence. And all these children came running out and were running along next to our convoy and smiling and waving. And, it just really drove home early for me in the tour. I think that the work that we were doing there was important, and it was good work, and that, we were doing good things for this country. So, I definitely, that was a huge take home for me. And, I'm happy that my tour started that way. I think like it gave a lot of meaning to the work that we were doing there. And then another story was just, closer to the end of my tour, we were out and came across some ANA soldiers. And as we passed by, I said my usual salam alaikum, and they replied with their wa alaikum wa salam. And then they just sort of stopped and stared at me for a few minutes, blonde hair, blue-eyed female, in uniform. And then when I said that I was a medic, all of a sudden their faces changed, and they were all smiles, and they all of them started rolling up sleeves and pant legs of just wounds that needed dressings and dressing changes, and nothing crazy, but it was such an incredible experience to get to actually sit down and have that moment. And I really sort of took that medicine is just this international language, and that you don't need to be able to communicate in the same language to be able to help somebody else using medicine. And it was just such an incredible experience to just sit down and take that quiet moment to do that for them. And I sort of now, especially reflecting back, I often can't believe that, that many years ago, that's where I was, and that's something that I was doing.
Yeah, and those guys were probably so thrilled to just get some Band-Aids from you and get all patched up.
Yeah, no, for sure.
In your team, did you guys have Afghan National Army members as well?
No, we didn't. We would sometimes work with them, but not very often. So.
Okay.
And I just had one more sort of funny story if it works. Sure. And we were out for quite a few days, and it was a few Americans and then 2 of the Irish soldiers. And it was just a quiet day, and we were all sitting around. We were pretty tired from the previous few days, and we were drinking coffee, and I looked at Dave, one of the Irish guys, and I said, "Can you say something, Dave?" And he's like, "Why, of course, Leigh, what is it?" And I said, "They're always after me, Lucky Charms." And we were just in stitches, and they had no clue what that was from. And, I mean, I'm sure this story is funnier to me now because we were so tired, and we just needed that. And he was to explain to him the Lucky Charms breakfast and the commercial. And anyway, so I was telling one of my girlfriends about it back home, and she actually sent me a box of Lucky Charms. And so I had brought this box of Lucky Charms, and the only milk I could find that was like that ultra high treated chocolate milk. And so I had this like UHT chocolate milk and poured it on a bowl of Lucky Charms, and I was like, "Here you go, like this is the cereal I was talking about." And the look of disgust on his face that he tasted it. And I just remember his comment was like, "You feed this to your children for breakfast?" Like, Yeah.
No
Anyways,
one's going to
was,
be after the Lucky Charms after that.
but not after that.
I feel like Irish people know how to have fun no matter where they are.
Oh my gosh, they were such a hoot. Yeah. Yeah. They were always just like twinkle in their eye up to no good.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. It's funny, just a sort of a side topic. On Instagram, I follow this page because I'm kind of into, not that I've done a lot of it, I'm really into mountaineering, but there's this page in the northern part of Afghanistan and they teach mountaineering to the women there and climbing. And it's super neat just because all the stuff I've seen from obviously Canadians being over there was the women being, all covered up or just not seeing women at all and not being allowed to do anything. And then I look at this Instagram page and I see them out climbing in the mountains, and they even did a marathon recently. So I thought that was really, really neat.
That's so neat. That actually makes me so happy because, I definitely can say that my time there, all you saw was men. Like it was markets, like no matter where you were, it was little boys and men. And, even to see women in burqas was not that common. Or maybe you just didn't really notice them because they were so covered. But I would even say up north, like I didn't notice a huge difference up north, versus the south in terms of who we saw out. Yeah, I remember on my HLTA, I went to Florida to sort of go skydiving and get my jumps so I could try out for the Skyhawks when I got home. And I just remember in the airport, I got out of the plane and my first thought was like, oh my God, look at all these women. Like I felt like I hadn't seen women in months, and I didn't even realize that I hadn't seen women. It was just such a normal thing that just there was guys, and then the majority of my team, and no matter where we went, it was the majority of soldiers are men. So it was so funny that I realized that, or noticed it, I guess. Like that was my biggest take home from getting off the airplane and being in the airport there. Yeah, any chance that I got, I always asked to go to CAF because I love my Tim Hortons. And I would always make sure to bring a box of donuts back for everybody.
So were you traveling by road or by helicopter or both?
Yes. Yeah, I definitely had a lot of convoys, sort of to pro. But then we also, I would say some of the highlights were definitely sitting in the back of Chinooks and other helicopters and getting to see the country from a little bit higher. was a really neat experience.
So with that team, you would be responsible for getting called out if there was an IED call. Is that the idea? Or were they clearing certain sections of road for other convoys to move through?
We were sort of supporting everything. So we worked a lot with the Women's Intelligence Team. So we called it like CSI Afghanistan.
Okay. Yeah.
So sort of supporting them. And another big part of our team was just sort of the reporting back as well. Like once sort of one person from the team was always sitting at in CJOC to sort of report back to the ISAF command on sort of the day's events across the whole country. So
okay. Were there any other women on your team, or were you the only one?
We had one other woman, and we worked together quite a bit. I really enjoyed working with her. I think at first, because she was an American soldier, and she was there first, and she wasn't so sure when I showed up. I think she enjoyed being the only girl, but I think anybody who knows me could attest that I'm fairly non-threatening.
Yeah, it seems like it from what I've seen so far. So was it on deployment? Is that how you met John Stone?
John was there as a civilian contractor. So I guess he'd worked with the team on a deployment prior as a military member, and then really enjoyed it, so went back. And so I ended up spending a lot of time with him. And it was funny because when I went to Afghanistan, sort of my next goal in mind was to start skydiving, because I really wanted to try out for the Skyhawks, and met John, and he was super into scuba diving. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I'd like to try that too. And we just became really, really close being on tour. And then when I got home, I texted him and I said, because he was an instructor, and he'd always said, "But come out to Nova Scotia and I'll teach you your open water scuba." Yeah, so then we got home. So I texted John at that point and I said, could you still teach me? And but it turned into this, sort of really nice closure, I'll say, from the tour, because I got back home, and as a reservist, nobody that I deployed with came back with me. So I felt a little bit on an island when I came home. And I definitely had, amazing friends who'd done other deployments, but it was just, you get so close to that team that you've deployed with. So yeah, it was just a really nice way to sort of reintegrate back, I'll say, and went out to Nova Scotia and froze. It would have been late April, early May.
Oh yeah, the water is absolutely freezing still at that time of year, and especially on the dive courses, because you're in a wetsuit, right? You guys didn't have dry suits for that.
Oh, no, John had a dry suit.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah, I just remember working at the shop, and I would always hear about like John Stone, and yeah, he's over in Afghanistan, because he was pretty much always there. I'd kind of see him. I had only met him a couple of times because he'd kind of pop in when he was back from Afghanistan, but then he'd be back over again. And then I definitely remember you and the other girl that you were with. And I remember John did a private course for you guys. So such a small world.
Yeah, that's too funny. Yeah.
And so the skydiving, like, had you gone skydiving before, or you just thought that you really wanted to get into it and try it for the Skyhawks?
Yeah, pretty much that's what happened. So it was when I was working at NDMC, and I was in the lunchroom one day, and there was a copy of the Maple Leaf sitting on the table, and the big main front picture was of this Skyhawk, exiting the plane with this like huge shit-eating grin on his face. And I just sort of made a comment to one of my buddies. I was like, what an amazing summer job. Like, I want to do that, or like summer tasking, I guess. And without even realizing, like, my buddy who I was sitting next to, Nirko, he said, I just did that last summer.
Oh, really?
Really do it. He's like, it's so fun. And yeah, so I, having never even considered really jumping out of an airplane, that quickly became my next goal of what I wanted to do. So the big hurdle for me with that was, with the Skyhawks, you have to pass the para PT test. So it's a mile run in 7.5 minutes, I think. I'm going to say 40 sit-ups roughly. So those I wasn't worried about. I knew I could do them, but you had to be able to do 7 chin-ups. And at that point, when I saw the Maple Leaf article and decided that's what I wanted to do, I could kind of sort of do 1 chin-up with a hop. So that quickly became my training focus. And yeah, so I guess that would have been in the summer of 2006. So I sort of had, or might have been even 2007, like sort of right before it would have been summer 2007. So right before I left for Afghanistan, I went to the local drop zone here in Ottawa, up at Armprior, and did a couple tandem skydives, and I just loved it. And so, yeah, that was it. I was hooked, and planned my HLTA from Afghanistan and around sort of that goal. So I went to Z Hills in Florida, where they have a drop zone that's obviously Florida weather. You can jump in January, and just sort of worked towards getting my A license and the 50 jumps that I needed to try out for the team.
I've read their message that comes out every year that you need the 50 jumps. So do they put everyone through a physical tryout, or do they just sort of look at the files and select people from there? Or how do they actually pick their team?
Yeah, for sure. So we all apply. And I'm not sure how many they end up taking each year versus how many apply, but certainly I got a message inviting me to the camp. And so the very first morning of the very first day, we all went out and did the para PT test. And I remember there was me and one other girl, Annie Thibodeau, and we were both so nervous for those chin-ups. Like we both knew we could do them, but I would see sort of like, I'd worked towards 7 and I knew I could do 7, but I was like, oh, I hope they count all of them.
Right.
And yeah, but I would say definitely with the adrenaline that morning, I probably could have done 10. Like I was just was not giving up at that point. So no, it went well for both of us. And yeah, and then so from there we sort of did a couple weeks of ground training in Trenton. So we went through all the sort of aircraft drills or emergency drills, learned how to pack the way that they wanted us to pack, because a big part of the sort of show routine, everybody sees us in the sky, but the actual sort of PR aspect of it is packing your parachute in the crowd. So we did a lot of packing practice, and then we were off to California for 6 weeks for training down there. And then that's sort of where they selected the team based on different, there's the show routine sort of set, and then they just every year sort of fill people into where their strengths lie for the show routine. So,
and when you applied, did you have just that bare minimum 50 jumps, or did you have more than that? And when you went into the training, did you find that your previous experience was sufficient, or would you recommend that someone has sort of more than that if they want to try out?
So I had just my 50 and I definitely felt nervous trying out for the team with only 50. But I also have to say that, I mean, obviously having more jumps would never hurt, but the type of jumping that the Skyhawks do is a lot different than the jumping that most people do at civilian drop zones. So sort of the main sort of style of skydiving that most people do is called relative work. So it's you're sort of flat, dumb, and happy, as we say. So you're flying on your belly and sort of moving around, and the fun is jumping with other people and trying to make different points and that way. And when you're under canopy, you basically are as far away as possible from any other jumper in the sky. And the Skyhawks, because it's sort of, they want it to be visible from the ground. The Skyhawks show routine is canopy relative work. So we actually don't do much free fall. You open your parachute right away, and we're getting as close as possible and linking up under canopy. So the show is sort of, basically it's what the skydiving community calls canopy relative work, or crew jumping, which most skydivers actually think is crazy, because it's if anything happens, you're losing your main parachute. So so definitely I would say for landings, for accuracy, for anything else, coming with more jumps would never hurt. But I also think, it's the Skyhawks, the training camp, you're jumping 6-7 times a day with a camera crew, like a cameraman behind you. And so you're, landing, you're debriefing that jump, you're learning from it, and you're taking off right away after. So it was sort of, I would say the learning curve was very steep, but it definitely prepared us for the sort of show season ahead.
Okay. And then from there, then you basically go travel around North America and perform for air shows and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So we always joke that we were living like rock stars for the day.
Yes.
Or for the summer, I suppose. And, it was like the best kept secret in the Canadian Armed Forces. So we were, my year, we were just in Canada and the US, but some years they've gone like over to Europe and jumps in Japan as well. So but it was such an incredible way to see the country, especially, we jumped literally coast to coast, and we were flying everywhere that we went in our jump plane. So we were never rarely were we flying over 1,000 feet, because it wasn't a pressurized plane. So we needed supplemental oxygen to fly over the Rockies. When we did that, we all had to wear oxygen masks on our face. And so it was just like such a beautiful way to see the country. And I definitely say one of the most memorable jumps my year was up in Iqaluit. We went up way up north to Nunavut, and it took a really, really, really long time to get there in our casa. But yeah, just to see the north like that was just an incredible experience. So
Yeah, that would be
yeah.
really neat. And as you're doing these shows, you're interacting with the crowds, is that right? Because I've seen pictures of, Skyhawks signing autographs for little kids.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it was funny when I showed up, I really wanted to be the candy cane. So that's where you have 6 smoke grenades on a lanyard. So you sort of hook your smoke grenades up ahead of time so that all you're doing once your parachute's open is throwing this lanyard down with a weight attached to the bottom and spiraling down. So the smoke creates this candy cane effect on the way down. And, most of the guys thought that was pretty boring because you're just spiraling. But for me, I was like, but that's, having seen the show before, from the kids' perspective, that's what they all thought was so neat. And it was so funny because the guys used to make fun of me and they were like, oh, all the kids want to know who the candy cane was. So,
There we go.
yeah, so definitely, in the crowd, that was neat because the kids would, like I said, always remember which one you were as the candy cane. And definitely I had some very proud girl power moments, I would say, when moms would bring their little girls over and, they would say, she wants to be just like you when she grows up. And, so lots of pictures definitely with kids in the crowd and any of another adults as well. So
When I was in Toronto, of course, there's a lot of PR stuff. Like we would always have a stand set up at the Canadian National Exhibition and other events across the city, and there'd be like little girls. And I can just remember one being like, "Oh, like I didn't know little girls could be in the army." And I was like, "Well, first of all, I'm in the Navy, but yes." So it's yeah, I'd imagine that would be super cool for little girls to see a skydiver.
yeah, definitely. And similar to your Navy story, we would often, because as air shows, we'd get, because we had Skyhawk posters that would get passed out and we would sign those. Like we'd have an autograph table at the end, usually set up. And often people would bring over the Snowbirds posters to us. And so we'd write like "Go Army" all over it.
Yeah.
Have fun with it. But we had such a great time, like meeting and traveling a lot with the Snowbirds as well. It was always a very fun back and forth we had with them. So.
Yeah, I was gonna say because they probably did a lot of the same shows. So did you ever get to go for a ride in one of the Snowbird planes?
No, I would have loved to, but I've sat in one before. There's one Snowbird, his call sign, well, everyone just calls him it all the time, is Happy. And he was actually featured not too long ago on the last Canadian Amazing Race. So
Okay.
He's just this incredible guy. And yeah, so whenever we'd see them, we definitely go hang out after the shows. But yeah, I know Happy let me sit in the plane one time and get my pictures, everything that I wanted. But yeah, our year, I think two Skyhawks actually got to ride with them, but it was sort of a split show where half the team stayed in Trenton and the other half of us went up to somewhere else in Ontario anyways. So the Herc took off and dropped the Trenton Air Show people off and then kept going with the rest of us.
So then after the Skyhawks, where did you go from there? Were you still a medic? Did you decide to get into nursing?
I was a medic when I was with the team and got posted to Edmonton. And that's when I sort of was thinking about applying to nursing. So the first time I'd thought of it in the military was when I was in Afghanistan. I was working often at the Roll 1 with this American nurse. And, as a young medic, I really sort of looked up to her. And, so I had sort of thought about it back then, but still wanted to have fun as an NCM.
Right.
Yeah. So it was when I was in Edmonton, applied for an after degree nursing program. So it was only 2 years because I already had the health science degree, and then I applied to do that through the military. So I worked for 1 year at the One Field clinic in Edmonton as a medic, and then started nursing. So it was 2 years at the University of Alberta.
Okay. And what are some of the big differences between in the forces being a medic versus a nurse? Because I know sort of in the civilian world, the nurses are very hands-on. You're working on a med surge floor or long-term care, that sort of thing. But in the forces, what is the role of a nurse?
So now how we have everything set up is the majority of the clinical nurses are actually posted to what we call HRDs, or high readiness debts. So they're debts of one Canadian Field Hospital in Petawawa. So there's one in Edmonton, one in Ottawa, and one in Halifax. And then we also have one in Montreal and Vancouver, where we have the training centers as well. So nursing, if you're posted to a high readiness detachment, which was my first posting out of university, I was at HR Edmonton. And our job is basically just to maintain our clinical competencies and currency. So we're, for the most part, working in civilian hospitals just full time within your specialty. So whether you're general duty nursing officer, you're working on med surge floor or in the emerge, critical care, working in ICU or emerge, operating room nurse or perioperative nursing officer, obviously working in the OR, and the mental health as well. And then there's sort of another subspecialty, which is air medevac. So they have both GDNOs, so general duty nursing officers, who have the air medevac qual and critical care as well. So that's sort of the majority, I would say, of especially young nurses in the CAF are going to these high readiness detachments.
Mm-hmm.
And then sort of other postings as nursing officers would be to a clinic working as the primary care nurse, sometimes in staff officer roles. So when I got back from maternity leave, I was actually posted to Montfort as the OPSO. And then now I'm working at headquarters and I'm working in patient safety. So it's not a clinical role, but definitely one that I'm really appreciating from, sort of taking my background and experience sort of on the floor in the clinics and applying it to basically from the headquarters level to work on patient safety within the CAF.
Mm-hmm. And then after that, if you were to get posted, could you potentially be back in a clinical role after that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I sort of finished university, we do a year of clinical phase training, and that's sort of just giving us a year to consolidate all of our skills from school to working in a civilian hospital. And when I got posted to the HRD, I was a general duty nursing officer. So I was working medicine, surgery, and emerge. But sort of in school, I quickly realized that the operating room was where I wanted to be. So I applied to the operating room specialty. And when we got posted to Ottawa in 2015, sort of did that training. So definitely, yeah, if I went back to clinical, I would either be at the HRD working full time in the operating room, or we actually still in Ottawa have I think we're the last military OR room that runs. So
okay, interesting.
Actually, yeah. So we just sort of hop over to the civilian side of the Montfort Hospital, and we have one operating room there. So got usually a couple perioperative nursing officers posted to run that operating room.
So with all of this stuff, I mean, we've been sort of chronological so far, but when did you get involved in triathlon?
Yeah, so that was a funny story. It was actually another military nurse who's actually now just finished up med school, Stephanie Smith. And I used to see her at NDMC all the time in the gym, and we would always chat. And at that point, I was just sort of doing triathlons for fun, civvy side. And I would say triathlon was never a sport that I thought of doing, but I just from lifeguard was a strong swimmer, and running was always sort of the sport that I loved to do. So in high school, I raced cross country, and then cycling was never anything, and to this day it's still not one that I really train, but it was definitely in high school how I got from A to B. So sort of when I finished high school, that summer I did my first triathlon, and I borrowed my dad's road bike. And my dad is a very avid cyclist in Ottawa, and is cycling in Gatineau Park every day in the summer. And so, yeah, he put his seat down for me and adjusted everything for me. And and I had a great first race. And so my dad, I remember, was like, well, you know what, why don't I buy you your own bike if this is going to be your sport? So yes, over the next few years, just competed in a lot of, sort of very local triathlons or around Ottawa. And so then when I met Steph Smith, she was like, well, you need to try out for the CISM team and just come to this camp and just do this race. And so I think I raced CF Nationals in 2008 and finished second, which sort of got me a spot on the team for the following year. That was 2009. So it was the year that I was on the Skyhawks. So kind of missed out on the race season that year. But then 2010, I went to 2009 before Skyhawks, right before we had a training camp in Colorado Springs for the CISM team. And really, that's where I really sort of caught the bug and appreciated the incredible opportunity that CISM is for military members. So yeah, and then 2010 race nationals again. And that was sort of how I managed to get onto the team.
So there's a story also in the Esprit de Corps article about you doing a race in Switzerland and you ended up running barefoot carrying your bike.
Yes. It was what a race. So we made it to Switzerland, and I remember Ellen as well, like both of us were feeling pretty petered out by that point in the triathlon season. And, both of us were like, hey, we just have to make it through this race and the season's done, which is a terrible way to look at a race. Like it was her big, like it was Worlds that year. I remember, getting to the start and like being really excited, and ended up having this fantastic swim. And I think I was maybe in 20 or 21st place out of the water, which, for me, I was so excited. I definitely had no illusions of finishing in the top 10 or anything like that. Because most of the athletes we were competing against had just come back from the Olympics. So a lot of the military CISM members are sort of, I would say, part-time, full-time athletes who put on a uniform to come to CISM. And one incredible experience for us to get to race with them, but definitely we sort of had our expectations set. So, felt like I was having this incredible race coming out, and, had a really nice little small group that I was cycling with. And I think it was a very loopy course. So we had to do, it was 40 kilometers. And I want to say each lap was 5 kilometers or something. We were just going in circles. And on the third loop of this, there was this huge monster hill, and halfway up the hill I got a flat tire. And I had just passed the tire drop, or like tire swap place, and I had nothing to obviously change my tire on the course. And so I remember got off my bike, and you can't run in bike shoes because
with the clips.
Took those off and started walking, and I was like, well, I guess my race is done. But about 20 seconds later, I was like, you know what, like I'm in Switzerland, this is Worlds. And so I picked up my bike and had it on my shoulder and ran. And so it was, about 3 kilometers that I had to run to get to the tire swap. And then, talk about skills under pressure and how I probably should have practiced changing a back wheel, because it's something you just do without thinking about, but with everybody staring at me watching, I'd like completely forgot everything. And I could just see everybody standing there wanting to give me a hand. And anyway, so by that point, my race was, finished in terms of any kind of placing, but I did finish. Like it felt good to at least finish the course. And it was also really neat was I was able to help the Canadian team when I hopped back in. I just basically pulled anybody that I could on the bike portion so they could draft off me. And I don't think my legs have ever felt so done. The 10K run, I was just like, they were just jello. I had nothing left in them from the bike. But yeah, so that was sort of my sad trip to Worlds, I'll say. But I think what was nice was it actually sort of got recognized afterwards, for the fact that I finished at least.
That's such a good mental shift for that pushing through, right? Because a lot of people might be like, oh, screw it, this is it, I'm out of the race, and just not bother, right? But like you said, even if you're not going to place, you're finishing it and you're doing that for you. So that's super neat. So what are the distances that you were doing for the triathlon?
So CISM Triathlon is Olympic distance. So it's 1,500 meter swim, a 40K bike, and then a 10K run. I finished very randomly one Ironman triathlon when I got home from Afghanistan. I, on very little training, decided that was a good idea. So I kind of have that one under my belt. But
what was that experience like? I mean, those are so long. It's crazy to think about doing any one of those individual events by themselves, but then stacking up the Ironman, like the swim, the bike, and then the run is just insane to me.
Yeah, I don't know. I was 25 and my body just kind of was good at going, I'll say. And it's funny because I obviously wasn't training any of those sports in Afghanistan, but I think just being out all the time with, all my battle rattle and my jump bag, I was sort of carrying around an extra 75 pounds just to go out. So I guess that was in the end sort of good conditioning.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I definitely swam a lot that summer and had done some longer swims in Meech Lake and races in Meech Lake, and had done my first marathon that summer as well. And yeah, I remember on the bike, so it's a 180 kilometer bike, and I was like, I think I'm doubling my mileage during this race. And I had sort of added all the other triathlons that I'd done that summer, which was really my only other cycling. And I was like, yeah, like I had 180 kilometers on my bike that year. So
that's so long.
It was. And having done very little prep and training for it, I figured what I would want for food during the race was sugar. So I'd bought all this, just went to Bulk Barn and got all these like gummy worms and gummy bears and things like that. And I remember on the run, I was like, I just want salt. So fortunately, I'd packed some saltine crackers, and I grabbed that at one point and was walking and eating these saltine crackers. And one of the aid stands actually had like the salt tabs. And I was like, yes. Oh, I'll take one of those. And I drank so much Gatorade on the bike course that I couldn't drink Gatorade for months afterwards. And then after the race, we went to the Royal Oak, like just in Ottawa near the airport. And I was like, I just want salt. So I got like deep fried dill pickles, just like things salty.
Yeah. Well, that is one of the things during ultra marathons, you hear of people drinking the pickle juice for the salt content.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. So how did you balance training for all these triathlons with working?
Yeah, it was funny. That was one of your questions that I'd sort of thought about. And my answer as I was writing notes was, it was easy. I didn't have kids. Because I definitely, I'm finding now that I have a little one at home, it's so hard to train at all. But definitely, I've always said my whole life I do my best work at 11 o'clock at night. So I definitely remember, I say the majority of my CISM years were living in Edmonton, and it's dark by 3 p.m. in the winter time, and you really can't run outside in the winter. It's so cold. So we had a treadmill, we had a big unfinished basement, I had a treadmill down in the basement. And oftentimes I would start my runs, especially my long runs, at like 11:30 at night, and often run into the next day. And I remember getting off like after like a 16-kilometer run and being like, well, I wonder if that counts for 2 days of running. Like, one day to the next. But yeah, and then definitely being a university student for 2 years of that, I had access to the university pool in the morning. So often I would just go in early before classes started and get my swim done then. And then my run usually would be sort of my very end of the day after I was done studying. All my readings for the day would go downstairs and hop on the treadmill. So
I'm really kind of big into the mental aspect of training and racing and just what goes through people's heads. So if you were, say, that bike ride that was 180 kilometers, you're 100K into that and you're sore and you're just like, this is so long and my legs are burning, and if you were to think ahead, oh, I still have 80 kilometers to go on the bike. And then after that, I still have to run a marathon. How do you reconcile that in your head and how do you keep pushing?
I honestly think for the Ironman, it was, you just looked at how much you'd already done. So when I ran the marathon earlier that summer, mentally, I really struggled, and it was like, I'm just running the marathon. And whereas by the time I got to the marathon in the Ironman, I was like, well, I already biked 180K and swam 4 kilometers. Like it's a 3.8 kilometers swim. So I was like, but now all I have to do is run 40 kilometers. Like I actually found, like, mentally it was so much easier. And I remember on the bike portion, I was like, oh, I just want to do 100 kilometers. Like I've never biked 100 kilometers before. So so that was sort of my goal, was to get to 100. And then I was like, oh, well, I'm more than halfway done. So that part, definitely, I think too, for the Ironman, my goal was really just to finish. And, I knew I had, I think, 16 hours to finish, and I ended up finishing in 12 and a bit hours. But, mentally, that was the thing I was most worried about, was just that 16-hour timestamp. Yeah, but definitely, I agree. And I think, like, the mental game is such a part of it. And, when I was racing CISM, I remember my first race at one of our big races is at Point Magoo. So it's down, it's a Navy base in the US, and that's their US championships. And so most years the Canadian CISM team goes down and races with them. And that was my first time racing in the ocean. And I remember, because I was in university, I showed up a few days late, like usually a few days to sort of train. So I got there and I was like, oh, I guess I should, familiarize myself with the swim course, and put my wetsuit on. And I think the guys had already sort of finished their training. And so they were hanging out at the beach. So I wasn't completely alone, but I was alone in the water. And I got maybe like 200 meters out and saw jellyfish, and I freaked out. Like I've never swam so fast out of the water.
Yeah.
And the beach, and just like the taste of salt water and the waves coming in. Like it was just, I wasn't prepared for that at all. And I had a terrible sleep the night before. And I was just like, I don't even know if I can finish this swim, and really doubted myself. And that was probably my worst triathlon, sort of like big race, in terms of just the whole race, just nothing really felt smooth. And I think it was just, I was so hung up on that first saltwater swim. So I remember the next year when I was back, I, sort of said like, hey, no, I need to do some mental training for this one. And, really sat and just focused. And my head was okay, I did it last year. It was fine. I, didn't get stung by a jellyfish. And then it's funny because in a triathlon, like so little of it is the transitions, but that's also the part that I feel, if you have a really smooth transition, out of your wetsuit onto your bike, you feel great going out onto the bike. And then the same thing, if you have a really smooth transition off your bike into your run, you're already sort of 3 steps ahead. So that's where I really found the mental game came in triathlon. And, I would just really picture how each of my transitions were going to go, and just mentally. And I think that's really when I started doing well in triathlon, was sort of picturing where I was going to come out of the water, how I was going to enter the water, and imagine coming out of the water in first place and getting onto the bike in first place, and, just having this really strong run, and picture how I would finish my run. And so, I think at that level, everybody's got the training background. And so it's really the mental game that makes or breaks a race for people, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think people do underestimate that visualization as well. I mean, I read a book called Mind Gym by a guy who coaches a lot of the top NFL and Major League Baseball guys. And I mean, that's one of the big things that he said was one of the biggest differences between the ones who are the most successful and the other ones. Before the game, they get in the zone, they visualize everything, because you might be as fast or as talented as the next person, but if you let something get in your head, then that could mean the difference between first place and way further down or even quitting, right? So
and I think it's funny, like that's where the trampoline background actually really helped me, because in trampoline, if you ever pull before a competition, they're standing there and they're like moving their bodies and their eyes are closed and they're sort of visualizing their routine. And so definitely I was sort of used to doing that. So to think to switch it to triathlon, which is such a different sport, right? Like there's no artistic side really to triathlon and be getting out of your wetsuit.
Not as graceful.
No, definitely not.
So for the training for triathlon, did you do mostly endurance or did you have a strength training component as well?
I would say mostly in endurance, definitely sort of ramping up in February, March timeframe is when we would have our CISM like camp usually down in Florida. And then, but I definitely found sort of by September, October, you were needing a break and a change. So that's usually when I would switch to more strength training. So either like sort of more CrossFit training or just even I just would find weights in the gym was such a nice break, because mentally I don't have to go and run like 8 kilometers or do anything hard. And I mean, it's hard, but in a different way. So I definitely really appreciated that. And I always felt too, like it sort of gave me a good strength base to start again the next season. So.
Right, exactly. It's almost like you sort of build it up over the winter and then doing that endurance sort of does take away some of the strength portion. But I mean, at the same time, you still need the strength.
Yeah, no, for sure. It was really, just like this nice balancing act. And I just found too, if you're 12 months of the year, your body and your mind just sort of needed the break from the hard run training and everything. So.
Sure. And are you still doing triathlons or what do you do now to keep in shape?
Right after I had my son, I was out with the running stroller and that was actually a lot more fun than I expected. And I remember reaching back out to Eric Travis, who's now the CISM Triathlon manager. And I was like, I wore my running watch and I was running 433 kilometer, pushing the running stroller. Having a good laugh about that. But I'm sort of been struggling with this ankle injury that's, an old one. And it just took such a beating, which I was just joking with my physiotherapist. I was like, it's my Achilles heel for sure. But yeah, I know it's just this ankle. And I said, I don't regret anything that I've done in my career that's gotten it to this point, but it's definitely a bit of a showstopper right now for my training. And I just had surgery on it last fall and meeting with the orthopedic surgeon, sort of follow up and cortisone injections now. And I was telling him, it's funny, it's one of the surgeons that I work with as an OR nurse. And I was like, no, you have to get this fixed because I want to race Kona and I have all these like patients. And he looked at me, he was like, how old are you now? And he was like, swimming good, cycling very good, running not good. So I think, as much as running has definitely always been my outlet for everything, I'm sort of, at that point where I'm like, okay, well, do I want to keep using my body and my ankle, or is it time to, shift focus and, focus on the swimming, or which is kind of difficult during COVID, or the cycling. So I'm trying really hard to make the switch to cycling. I just miss the running so much. So
yeah, that sort of brings us into my next question, which was, what are your goals for the future? I guess you just said your athletic goals. So career-wise, what are some goals that you have?
Yeah, so I'm actually at this interesting point in my career where my current contract is up in August. And, to this point, I'd just been kind of trucking along with everything as it came. And all of a sudden I'm like, wow, like I could do something different. And I'd never even considered that as an option. So, I think my goal moving forward, I definitely would like to stay in. And I'm just, honestly, it sounds funny, but I'm so happy in the position that I'm in right now. So I'm working as the National Patient Safety Officer. So I have a, sort of a big part in reviewing all of the patient safety incidents that are coming in through our national national database. But a big part of my role right now is creating sort of a communication to all the prof tech and the subject matter experts. And, I guess from comparing it to the earlier parts of my career, it doesn't sound quite as high speed, I guess, but it's been such a rewarding experience to get to work somewhere that I feel like I'm really, giving back to the organization and really working hard to create, this culture of safety within the clinics and within the CAF, and just making the care that we're providing a safer is sort of the goal. So, it's funny. I know my time will be up at some point in the position, but I'm, hoping that I can get a couple more years where I am and just, finish these projects that I've started and see them through to the end. And then from there, I'm not sure what the CAF has in store for me, but I'm sort of rolling with the punches at this point.
From talking to you and reading about all of the different things that you've done in your career, it's such a great example of there are so many different opportunities within the CAF, whether it's opportunities through sport or to do something like the Skyhawks, where you're not changing trades, you're still whatever trade you were, and then you go do that tasking for a summer. There's lots of little opportunities like that for people to seek out that do want to do just a little bit extra or want to push themselves in certain ways.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that would definitely be, my advice to anybody else who's coming in is just, look for those opportunities and jump on them. And, I think looking back, I've been just so lucky to have so many people sort of on my side and in my corner and sort of cheering me on with anything that I've said that I wanted to do. And, there's so many little diamonds in the rough throughout. And yeah, it can just be such an incredible career with so many different things. I mean, when I went down to be a tree planter, I never expected that I would ever do any of the things that I've done, and I remember my first year in the military, and Afghanistan was really just starting, and I remember like the thought of going to Afghanistan is just terrifying. I thought, man, like I'm so glad that people want to do that, but I would never go there, and then it becomes this family. It really is truly a band of brothers, and you sort of feel like, well, if all my friends are going, I want to go too. And and so it's this, and I mean, it's the same thing with the skydiving. I always tell friends who want to do a tandem, I always say, well, ask to go near the end, because when everybody else is jumping out, like, it's true, like if all your friends are jumping off a bridge, you probably would, because you know what, like everybody else did it. So yeah, there's just so many opportunities.
What advice would you give a woman? I have young here, but I mean really any age, because I think definitely with the Canadian Forces, there are people joining a little later in life now. What advice would you give a woman thinking of joining the CAF?
I would just say, take advantage of every opportunity that presents itself, the good, the bad. I think, I've gone on exercises that I was sort of voluntold to, and, I don't want to say kicking and screaming, but definitely ones that I was inside, not super excited to go on. And often those are the best ones, and I always joke that it's the people that make the job, it's not the job. And so some of the worst sort of little taskings that I've had have been, or like what you would think are going to be the worst ones, are the best, because you have such a fun team to work with. So yeah, no, I would definitely say take advantage of every opportunity that presents itself, and surround yourself by the positive, empowering people, because there's so many people in the Canadian Armed Forces who will stand behind you, who will cheer you on, and seek those people out. Definitely, I feel very fortunate in my career that I've had so many people sort of back me up and cheer me on, for sure.
That's amazing. That's so good. Yeah. Your career, it's just, you've done so much cool stuff and had such an awesome career. Yeah. I'm super glad that we got to pin down a time and do this podcast.
No, absolutely. And, thank you so much for the opportunity. No, thank you. No, it's, and then I was going to say too, I listened to one of your podcasts, and you were interviewing a SAR tech, which had always been one of my goals in the CAF. And I kind of listened, and I thought, yeah, no, this is like, it's such a neat way to sort of share, and, I can motivate just one other person. I think that's fantastic.
Thank you for listening. If you'd like to help support this podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review on your Apple Podcast app.